Okay, so we are just a couple of weeks out from E3, and this is usually the time as hype and excitement builds that we start to see rumors get out there and at times legitimate leaks. And it appears that we do have an actual leak on our hands here from Square Enix. And it looks like that some of the show that they are planning for E3 coming up here in June is already starting to appear online. Snippets of trailers, logos, all kinds of stuff. And one of the biggest things that we have found out from these leaks is that there will be a Souls-like Final Fantasy game making an appearance, and it will be exclusive to Sony. And now we have another report that seems to sum everything up and add new information to this story, and I figure we'd go over that here today. Guys, if you enjoy these videos, make sure the like button helps out a ton, and if new here to the Spawn Wave Plus channel, make sure you subscribe down below. So let's head over here. This is to Fanbyte, where we can see here Imran Khan at the top. Square Enix set to announce a new action RPG Final Fantasy spin-off. The game will be set in the world of the first Final Fantasy, and if you remember, we talked about kind of the image that was put up on Twitter that had Final Fantasy Origin kind of just there in that screenshot. Well, it looks like that's actually the title of the game. Interesting to think that they would go back to like the NES Final Fantasy and have it take place in that world, but I guess if you think about it, that is a world that they could get quite a bit of recreation out of since it was on the NES and kind of reshape it and show it off with the newer technology here. So I think that's a pretty cool idea there. This is from the Fanbyte article kind of going over all of the things that took place this past weekend with the rumors getting out there and then the leaks and a lot of talk on different websites, on Reddit, and different gaming forums. It goes on to say the rumor states that Square Enix is working with Team Ninja, Koei Tecmo's in-house development team behind games like Ninja Gaiden, Nioh, and perhaps most relevantly, the latest entry in the Final Fantasy fighting game series, Dissidia NT. So there's already been a relationship there between like Team Ninja, Koei Tecmo, all of this, and Square in the past, so it's not surprising that they would want to maybe work on another game, one that would lean into the Souls-like genre, as that has picked up quite a bit of popularity over the last decade or so. They say our sources have corroborated this rumor and suggest the name of the game is Final Fantasy Origin. The game, which appears to be exclusive to PlayStation 5 with a PC release further down the road, will be one of Square Enix's tentpoles at their upcoming E3 show. For whatever reason, several large chunks of the updated June show have leaked out online, including the Final Fantasy Origins logo and demo plans. So there will apparently be a demo for this, and as they point out here, it'll be very similar to Nioh's public alpha, the idea being to get feedback from the audience while the game is still in a fairly early state. This demo, like several other major demos, has its own title of Stranger in Paradise, and Nate mentioned over on Twitter that he referenced this title during the Spawncast, and he was kind of just messing around a bit, having some fun there. But yeah, he kind of mentioned the demo's title while we were talking about the idea of a Final Fantasy Souls-like game that would be exclusive to Sony, with Square Enix showing it off. They go on to say, expect the title to play similar to Nioh or other games in the genre, but to be more accessible for a wider audience. Fanbyte sources indicated that the game is largely developed by the same team behind Dissidia NT, but that Team Ninja's nearly 200-person studio involves a lot of shifting around and that there aren't hard borders on the different teams these days. The Nioh DNA in the game is likely the result of people core to the first two games' development being involved in Final Fantasy Origin. And I think this is pretty important because what we're going to see here is a game that will not be like ridiculously difficult like we do see with some of these Souls games or like Nioh 2. It gets to a point at times where people will rage quit the game after like the second boss or something. Like it's pretty early on where you'll just start getting beaten up in these games. And generally the idea with these different Souls games is that you will work to eventually be able to overcome a very difficult boss, but you will die several times along the way until you get to that point where you've learned their moves enough, their patterns, and just overall maybe even farmed up enough souls and different things to level up and get stronger. But either way, it's usually a bit of a beatdown from the game before you get there. And there are people who just aren't really into that style of game, but they still like the idea of a Final Fantasy. So the demo makes a lot of sense because they're going to be walking this fine line between a very difficult Souls-like game and a very accessible Final Fantasy game, as they say, to a wider audience. To finish up, they say it's worth mentioning that anything could change before the final show, especially as more things leak out in the weeks ahead of E3, which I would expect that. I'm actually a bit surprised that Square's show is really leaking like this. It kind of seems like, from what I've been seeing, they just kind of recorded it internally and it's just been passed around, like just kind of showing it off. And at some point, well, it can end up online through emails or even just getting posted up on Twitter, which is probably going to happen, to be honest, based on how many people seem to be getting a hold of some of the footage. I feel like at some point it's just going to show up. I mean, we saw Elden Ring stuff show up online, and I figured that game would have been very quiet up until release. So, yeah, something from Square with a new Final Fantasy Souls-like game popping up online would be kind of expected at this point. Say, still production and marketing appear to be gearing up for a full swing on the title soon, so it should not be long until we hear about it. E3 appears to be the expected place. Square says they will be there, and I guess Summer Games Fest also, it could be there, but I'm kind of leaning towards this being one of their big showcases at E3, and it having the Sony exclusivity around it through the PlayStation 5 is once again something that I'm sure will be pushed there. And then through Sony with any of the state of plays, maybe they do coming up in, we'll say, end of June, early July. This is going to be a game I'm sure that's pushed at those different events as well, but it'll also come down to how far off we are with this game. I like the idea of them trying something different with the Final Fantasy franchise, like a Souls game, one more action-oriented than we've seen with, obviously, Final Fantasy in the past. But Final Fantasy's been moving away from, like, the traditional turn-based setup for quite a while now, obviously with Final Fantasy 15 and Final Fantasy 7 Remake leaning in heavily to the action side of things while still trying to hold up some of the RPG elements. But it hasn't been traditional turn-based like what we saw with, say, Final Fantasy X for quite a while now. So them just really jumping in full force to something that's all action-oriented and like the Souls genre does make a lot of sense. And if this works out well, it could kind of become its own series where maybe it goes to different points in the Final Fantasy universe and they can revisit these different worlds and different timelines. It's kind of a cool idea to really think about. So I hope it works out, and I hope when they show it, people get really excited and it comes out to be a really good game. So I guess we're going to find out here in a couple of weeks at E3, or who knows, maybe just on Twitter tomorrow at this rate with how it's being passed around. But let me know what you guys think about this one down below. Sony coming in, getting this Souls-like Final Fantasy game exclusive on the PlayStation 5. And from what we've seen with Neo, probably to the PC later on. I'm thinking a timed exclusivity deal of maybe a year on the PS5, and then it showing up on PC through like Steam, like, you know, a year later. But let me know what you guys think about this one down below. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you next time.